when they said, come let us go to the house of the Lord. I was glad when they say, come let us go to the church with no walls. You are my brother, you are my sister. From all over the world we are united in the house of God, in the church with no walls.
Welcome to this edition of the Church with No Walls podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dearbone, and today I have the extreme privilege of being joined by a man who has an amazing story, how he's come through on the other side from homelessness to addiction to now being in charge of his own life and being blessed by God to be here today. So with that, I'd like to welcome Scott Hartman to the podcast. Scott, welcome. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I am so honored and humbled to be on here. So thank you for reaching out. And thank you for even though we talked about it a year ago, time flies, but a year ago wasn't the time where God said, okay, now's the time. So I'm blessed and thank you so much.
Absolutely. And Scott, we've been talking a little bit before we started recording and just talking a little bit about church and not necessarily keeping it enclosed in the walls of a church, because even though, like you said, churches do need to be filled up, but not everything can be done in a church. There are ways to reach people. There are things that we can do outside of a church that don't necessarily get done inside a church. And we'll talk a little bit about your journey to where you're at now, but you mentioned that you do street ministry. Talk about what street ministry is, how you got started with it, and what that looks like.
When I was about, I would say between 90 days and 6 months into recovery, and I've got over 9.5 years in by God's grace. But I just wanted to, I remember the pain that I felt when I was homeless, that I felt I didn't have a voice, and I felt like I wasn't recognized, and I was being judged. And God just put it on my heart to where I just started just going out. At first, it was by myself. I would get some, whether it be bags of chips, or churches started to find out what I was doing, so they would, if they had extra food, they would, like hot dogs or something, they'd give it to me. And then I'd say, okay, God, where do you want me to go? And Ryan, I'm telling you, there was times that I would be the only white guy in this area that was not from that area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And it's a rough part of town, to where I had a couple people tell me, well, 90% of the people out here are black, right? And I said, well, yeah. And I'm tattooed and got a gold chain. They all thought I was a police. And then they realized that I wasn't. I was just had food and I could love on you. And so when I started doing that, it just kind of caught. And I just been doing it since about mid 2017. And I'd like to go where nobody wants to go. If I'm hearing gunshots, I could be in the right spot. Because everybody has a voice. Everybody should be heard. Everybody deserves a chance. And that's where the ministry came from, Vision of Redemption. Because I said, God, I want to do an LLC or a nonprofit. What do you, and about 3 months later, I don't have a name for it. And I'm sitting on the porch and I'm saying, okay, God, I'm still going to do the ministry, but there ain't going to be no name. And Ryan, he hit me in the head with a bat. Vision of Redemption. Because when I was homeless, I didn't think I deserved a chance, couldn't even see myself getting another chance. So that's where it came from. And I just want people to be better today than they were yesterday. And whatever barrier that is, let's fix it. And I was so mad at God when I got into recovery, so mad at him. So when I come across people anywhere, whether it be on in an encampment, on the streets, in a grocery store, whatever, and they're mad at God, okay, I've been there. I've been there. So let's figure out why. What's that barrier? Sometimes they tell you and sometimes they don't. But I have noticed that when you're consistent with that, then they get comfortable and they open up. Um, but a lot of times I get the answer pretty quick. Um, so when you show them the love of Christ in their environment, and you're planting that seed, at some point when they get off the street, and you pray they do, they may walk into a church and say, "Hey, I remember what that guy said, or I remember what that girl said." And I, I just have a love for people. I don't care what the background is. I don't care where you're from. I don't care. Like every other Monday night, I take Celebrate Recovery into a prison out, like a medium security prison out here. And I look at those guys and I say, look, what you did to get in here doesn't define who you are. What you're doing today does. I don't care what you did to get in here. What are you doing today? Um, and that's what I show people out on the, that's just the kind of love that I want to show people. And I wish somebody would have done that for me when I was on the streets, but I didn't get that. I got people now, granted, people brought me sleeping bags and they brought you food. Um, but sometimes I think it was just to check the box off.
Mm.
Um, I don't check the box off. I don't care about the box. I don't care about the checklist. I want to know where that pain is on the inside. Uh, you know, um, so that's kind of how that ministry started, and that's where it's at today. And I'm a big one in. People seem to think that everybody that unhoused is a drug addict or an alcoholic, and that's not the case. There's sometimes mental health, sometimes just life hits you, but none of that matters because it's still a human being, and that's still like when Jesus comes back, he's not going to be sitting with the millionaires. He's going to be sitting with the guy that's shooting dope, with the girl that's being sex trafficked, and that's where I go when I see that stuff a lot.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of the background on how the ministry started.
Wow. And I appreciate what you said, the fact that you go to places where other people won't go because sometimes you can see the same people and take it for granted. Oh, they're the same people, but there's the people generally that are hidden in the background because either they want to be hidden or because people aren't looking for them that need it the most. Everybody needs it, but they may need it the most. So I appreciate you saying that. And you were talking about how, you felt like people were just checking off the box for you when you were out there. Let's go back and talk a little bit. How did you find yourself homeless? How did you find yourself out on the streets? Because most of us, praise God, have not been in that situation. How did you find yourself out there and what was it like?
I was a um, I was a drug addict for 30 years, and I hid it well for a long time. But then, it was one of those where I was raped as a kid, I was beat as a kid, I had abandonment issues, didn't know how to deal with it, was in a bad accident. Doctor gave me pain pills, and that started it. And then I got into meth, and that just went on for well, I started using in 2017, and it was 46 when I got, so however long that 29, 30 years or whatever. Um, but near the end of my run, the last 2 or 3 years of my run, I was stealing from my loved ones.
Mm.
Um, my my fiance, my mom. So that's what put me homeless. Now there was a time where I would be staying in places there would be no water, no electric, but I had a roof over my head. But still, I was homeless, you know. And then it got really bad in December 2016 when I was on the streets of St. Louis, and it was it was scary because I when you're homeless in the country and you're staying in a place that has a roof over your head, and whether the piece of furniture is 1,000 pieces old, you got a place to stay, and you're kind of out of the elements. For me, when I was trying to find cardboard to lay down to so it wouldn't be so cold, and have a sleeping bag and just a place to block the wind. Um, that's where I was already mad at God at that point. But then when I was on the streets, that's where I don't want to use the word hate, but that was where I really started to get mad at him, because I didn't want to live anymore, and he wouldn't kill me. Because St. Louis is a dangerous city. And where I was running around, there's gunshots, and I wanted somebody just to shoot me, hit me with a car, whatever the case may be. Um, so that, I guess, the hate kind of fueled how I was doing at that moment. And then I got off the street and stayed with some friends, went on a 15-day stretch of being up, was in a meth-induced psychosis, collapsed, and then that's where my journey in recovery started. Um, but when you're on the streets and you're having to fight where you're, because I wouldn't panhandle, right? I see a lot of people panhandle. I wouldn't ask anybody for money. So if somebody offered some, great. If I had to dig in dumpsters, that's what I did. Um, and I just prayed if I was walking around during the day that I didn't run into somebody that I used to go to school with or whatever, because I was so ashamed, and I was so, because you're not showering. And you know, when I was in school and they asked me what I wanted to be growing up, it I didn't raise my hand and say I'm going to be a needle junkie. You know what I mean? It's just not the cards. Um, so I was just about as broken as you could get. Um, with that being said, with the lives that I have changed with God, anything that I do, it's all God. So I would go through and do it all over again if I could change one person's life.
Wow.
Um, and then this is how God works. I was begging God to kill me to end my life. When I woke up in a hospital and I was still alive, I was mad. But then as my journey with God started, and it started getting, and I was getting closer to Jesus, and God killed the old Scott and gave a new. So he answered that prayer in his time, not mine. And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
Um,
And now you mentioned your anger towards God. Had you growing up, you said like you had a lot of things happen to you. Did you ever have a closeness with God? Did you have a better relationship or feeling towards God that turned, or did you ever have a relationship with God before these situations started happening and you found yourself out on the streets?
well, when I grew up for the first 8 years of my life, I grew up in Germany. I was an army brat. My dad was a severe alcoholic, would beat us. So my mom and dad got a divorce, and we moved over to Terre de Lac, which had a bunch of lakes, and it's a community out there, and it's south of St. Louis as well. And we moved in with my grandma, and every Sunday we went to church. Every holiday we went to church. Um, on Christmas, she would make a white cake, put a white candle in the middle, um, and we would sing "Happy Birthday" to Jesus. I never knew why. I couldn't tell you. That was just the thing to do. Go to church on Sundays, and even after my grandma passed away, it was on Christmas we made the cake and sang "Happy Birthday" to Jesus. So I was going to church, but I wasn't there. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. You're going through the motions.
Yeah, yeah. It because nobody really explained. Um, but with that being said, maybe they tried, and since I'd already been dealing with physical abuse and then the abandonment issues, and then my grandma, God love her, but we were eating one night. My mom was gone, and I threw up on a plate of food, and I couldn't leave until I ate the throw up and the food underneath it.
Mm.
So that at that point, it was the physical abuse and then the mental abuse from somebody that would go to church on Sundays and sing "Happy Birthday" to Jesus. So my mind at that point, and that was before I even got raped. Um, my my mind as a little kid was already, I mean, it was always, I was already a mess, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
A total mess. So no, the relationship wasn't there. It was just going. I was one of those, um, and didn't realize it, where people just go to church on holidays, and that's it. They don't go on Sundays, but on holidays they're going to make sure that they're Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and um, it's where I kind of felt I was just on Sundays. I'm not giving it to God any other time. I may talk about, yes, there's a God, but I'm not having that relationship with him. It just wasn't there.
And so as you were going through, and like you said, you're out on the streets, you're addicted to drugs. Was there ever a thought that, hey, and you said, I want to die. Was there ever a thought that kind of maybe crossed your mind, hey, maybe there is something to live for. Maybe I need to give God a try. Was there ever that thought process, or was it pretty much, this is my end, this is the way it's going to be?
That's it. Because when my mom, in my drug addiction, right before I ended up on the streets, I stole from my mom. Um, she kicked me out. 3 days later, she had a brainstem stroke and she never recovered. So the last conversation I had with my mom was out of hate. So that's when the hate that's when I really started getting angry, because it was like, okay, God, my mom doesn't deserve to die. I do. Save her, kill me. Let's do an even trade here. She's got so much to live for. I don't. And when it didn't happen, that just kind of intensified my anger. Um, so there was no relationship. There was times I might have said, God is there, but Ryan, if you honestly look at 100%, it wasn't. When she passed away, that's where my anger intensified with him. And there was even a point when I was in my drug addiction, I get baptized, and before I hit the highway, I'm smoking a bowl.
Really? So how'd you even do the baptism? What made you want to get baptized when you were so deep into your addiction?
People said maybe that's what you need to do. So I was going through the motions.
Mm.
My heart wasn't there, but I was just kind of, um, it was one of those where, and this was before my mom passed away. So, um, but it was okay. I'm going to get baptized. My life is going to get better.
Like the automatic flip of a switch. Baptism equals life gets better.
Yep. And before I hit the road, I was smoking a bowl.
Mm.
Um, and then everything happened with my mom. And, you know, I, when my mom was in ICU before she went on hospice, I told my sister, who was in the emergency room with my uncle, my brother-in-law, and nieces, that I needed to go get something to eat to kind of process things. Right. 2 hours later, my sister calls me. She said, "Where you at?" I said, "I'm still at this restaurant. I can't deal with this." And Ryan, I was in South St. Louis. I had a hooker in the car and she was loading a rig. We were fixing to get high while my mom was dying after I stole from her.
Wow.
So when my mom passed, I was in the hospital already from a bad accident that happened because of my addiction. Um, and to this day, my sister still doesn't talk to me, and that she hasn't talked to me in 11 years.
Mm.
But when my mind started getting clear and I started working the steps, and it was like I did that to my mom, because mom is the one person that is never gonna, they're always gonna be there.
Yeah.
They're always gonna be by your side, love you unconditionally, blah, 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 blah. And I did that.
Mm.
And now she's not here. And she never got to see me clean. So there was a lot of anger. lot of shame and guilt on my end and anger towards God because he didn't answer that prayer. But honestly, Ryan, how could I expect him to answer that prayer when I couldn't fully open the Bible? I couldn't fully try to have that relationship. It was, I want what I want. I don't care what anybody else wants. I don't care what you want, God. I want you to answer my prayers. Um, and the sad reality is, I see that now with people. They think that God is like, I've seen God perform miracles. I see it every day, but they think that when they speak to God, there should be a magic wand. Boom, okay, you're going to get, God's going to, and when it doesn't happen, it's yeah, and I was one of them. So I was a mess. God, I was a mess. Um, but I also know that the times that I should have been dead, I used to think, oh, that was luck or that was coincidence. That was God. That was God. So me sitting here, but God, when I was robbed in East St. Louis, um, or when I was held at gunpoint, I'm still here. That was God's protection, whether I knew it or not.
So what was for you the breaking point where you were like, I've got to get clean? And did that happen simultaneously with you connecting with God, or did one happen before the other? Kind of how did that manifest itself?
Well, when I was on the streets, then I made it to some friend's house, and I said, "Hey, can I just stay here for 24 hours? I haven't slept in a while. I'm freezing. I need a shower and some food." And they said you could stay for 24 hours. I ended up staying 15 days, and there was two meth dealers there, so we were getting high, and we were shooting up in the morning, shooting up at night, getting high. So I got in such a psychosis. I thought there was an alien living behind this ear and an alien living behind this ear. And if you had a flat bill hat on, you were out to kill me.
Wow.
So I ended up collapsing after 15 days, woke up in a hospital 4 days later. And they said, "What do you want?" I said, "I'm done. I have no fight left in me, no family, no car, no, nothing." So then they got me into, they call two treatment centers that take people without insurance. Um, and I got into one, and there was 1,000-person waiting list. Even now, if I call them, they're booked up for 3 or 4 months. But they got me in 3 days because one day was Christmas, so they don't do intake. Um, and once my brain kind of unfogged, I realized that was Jesus that got me in 3 days. He said, "Okay, Scott, I got you. It's time. Let's do this." And when that happened, 1,000 guardian angels retired with full benefits. I can tell you, and they're probably um, so that was a turning point. And then for 4 years I did Narcotics Anonymous, and Narcotics Anonymous saved my life. It showed me how to live productive member societies, start to build my network. And I still do Narcotics Anonymous when I can, but there was a void. There was a void in here. I wasn't sure what that void was. Somebody invited me to celebrate recovery. Um, and that's when I realized that relationship, that void, I didn't have Jesus. Um, and the crazy thing is I didn't have a car for like the first 3 years of my recovery. So as I was starting to build new friends, if they were going to church, someone picked me up. And I went into a big, big, big mega church in the St. Charles area. And I didn't think I was going to make it to church. And I had a hat on, a shirt, and blue jean shorts. And I go and I sit in the second row. And the head of security came up 30. I wasn't sitting there 30 seconds. I don't think from the time I parked until the time I walked in till the time I sat down, couldn't have been 5 minutes. So I was sitting there 30 seconds. Head of security came up and said, "Come with me." And I said, "Okay." And he goes, "Are you packing?" They thought because of my appearance, I was packing a gun.
Mm.
I never held a gun. I was so mad how dare you going to judge me on how, and I've never been back to that church and I won't. So there was, knowing that God was with me and then having that happen. I mean, it was just kind of like all over the place. But one thing I had to realize is that we can't put our faith in the church or the people in the church, because they will disappoint every time.
Right.
We got to put it in God. So I had to learn that. And there was another instance where I got some really bad church hurt, really, really bad. And I was bitter for a while because we fight the flesh, right? We're human. And I was still working on myself and getting more confident. But again, we can't put the pastor on a pedestal. We can't put the church on the pedestal. We can't put anybody on a pedestal, because we fight the flesh. And whether sometimes people don't realize it, but they're going to offend you. And it's not God offending you, it's that person.
Yep.
So you got to pray for that person and still give it to God. So through all of that experiences, and I will back up right before I really started doing the ministry stuff. I was right at 90 days, and a lady reached out to me on social media that was in the area and said she needed help with their daughter. Her daughter was an addict and she didn't know how to help. And I said, okay, let's meet up. So we met up, and this lady and I, we started friends. And she was a life coach with other women because she was a police officer in a different state, got raped from one of her officer partners. So she moved up here and wanted to help other women. And we were talking one day, and I looked at her and I said, I don't understand, when a woman is in an abusive relationship and they keep getting beat, why don't they leave? I didn't understand that. Ryan, she looked at me and she said, why didn't you just stop doing dope? And I'm going, oh,
wow.
Why don't you hit me a little harder with that? But I needed to hear that. So from then on, that's when I started, I started like watching people and what makes them tick and and that's kind of like when the ministry started available, because a lot of people will judge you. They will not. And when you're beat down and broken and you don't feel like you have a voice, that's just a double whammy. And even now, I still remember some pain that when nobody was there for me or when somebody looked at me, and I don't, and I asked God to help me to keep that in my heart. And there's 2 days I don't want to forget. One, the day I collapsed, and two, the last day I was on the streets, because that helps me be grateful for where I'm at. But when I remember that pain, and it's in a healthy way, that drives me to help other people, because if I can help them get through that pain and see light at the end of the tunnel, then everything that I went through in life was worth it. Everything, and I would do it over again, and I wouldn't think twice about it.
We'll hear much more from Scott Hartman on our next edition of The Church with No Walls. I'm your host, Ryan Dearbone, and as always, take care and be blessed.
Come let us go to the church with no walls. You are my brother, you are my sister. From all over the world we are united in the house of God, in the church with no walls.